appreciate your time coming in today. Before I get started, I want to cover a few base items. Like the description said, this is a once overview. It's not going to get superly high technical in it. It's really about how to implement agile processes, specifically lean agile processes into your work environment. So please take some of those and apply it as it goes to your work environment, I guess. The other side of that, I'd like to try to keep it as interactive as possible. Sometimes that's difficult to do simply because of the virtual. There is a quiz about halfway through, but you get to keep the answers. It's just kind of a self-awareness kind of perspective. And I'll pause on that slide for a little while so you can see that and kind of take that and gauge where you're at within your organization and how you may be able to affect that. So let me stop the video and I'll share my slides and we can get running. All right. So system engineering agility, this is really about surrounding your organization around value streams and value manufacturing type principles based on lean agile. A little bit of my background. I know it was in the presentation slide, but I think it's fair just to kind of discuss it. So I have a couple degrees. I've been around the military, in the military for pretty much my life. I've worked on nuclear elements, worked with senior leaders across multiple different avenues, the DoD CIO office, been in Korea for about 12 years, did a few stints over in England for a little bit, all around the East Coast, traveled a bit, worked with DC3, helped develop their digital centers of academic forensic excellence, which is similar to like the IA centers of excellence, but really focused on digital forensics. Did a lot of things that were entertaining with NSA. I now work in AFRICOM, the J2, and probably the most important bullet there is the last one is that I really do enjoy soccer. I like fast cars, and luckily for me, now that I'm in Germany, there's beer. Order may vary depending on whatever the day or circumstance may be. So, because all good slides and presentations start with a clever quote, I thought I would start with Mike Kirsten. And this is really one of the biggest issues, I think, across DoD specifically, is that we're always trying to change. It's not that our organization doesn't need change or doesn't understand that there has to be some type of transition. It's really more that they're in this constant revolution process and they're not exactly sure where to go. Right, so everybody chases whatever the new buzzword, new framework is. I'm sure as we go through this presentation, you'll notice a lot of these things, both with agile and with general business processes, sound a lot like other military type terms. They're just applied slightly different. So our organizational structures. Right, you have similar to like the small business element or the entrepreneurial mindset, you have customer centric, which is represented on the left. So you have that customer, that base, and you have a couple different networks that pop around them. And that really does, kind of build that really agile, mobile, nimble kind of perspective of whatever they need, you go get it. It's just a do environment, but there's not much process stability or predictability in general. And on the right side, you'll notice there's more of the traditional hierarchy structure. You have a couple of things up at top, it tiers down, everything feeds up to the top for decision, everything feeds back down for action. Well, the downside of that is yes, you have incredibly great processes, incredibly great functions. It's also incredibly slow. So these two things constantly revolve around each other, and one will break up. You'll have hierarchies break up and build into more customer-centric or mission-centric type elements until they grow enough that that's no longer functional because you just can't do it with 4 to 10 people. You actually have to have some processes, so you have repeatability, process improvement, and so on, which complicates the situation. So you have this eternal or infinity loop, if you will, that kind of builds one up, tears it back down, builds it up, tears it down, and then you have structures of build up and tear down. So this is kind of where we have our created problem, right? One of the biggest ones is symmetry, which is, I'm sure most of you are well aware of. is that not everyone is on the same page, if they're even at the same time on the same page or on the same page at all. And then if you kind of pull that out, you have to define, okay, for this mission set or this operational view, what is that value? Who does it provide what to who for what decisions for that type of function? What does done look like? And what I mean by done is it's a time and point where something is completed and it can be handed over to the next operation component, whatever that may be. You have issues defining priority, because in the hierarchy type structure, my priority may not be your priority, may not be their priority. So I'll get to you when I get to you kind of thing happens. And you also have decision convolution, right? So nobody knows who's supposed to make what decision. It's a highly centralized decision point. Everything goes up and comes back down. If it's a highly decentralized, everybody wants to be a chief, nobody wants to be an Indian, so pretty much nothing actually happens. You have the balance issues that come in, right? So how fast can we do it versus how well is it done? Is it all about the people? Is it all about the tools? Is it about how we do it, or what does it provide? Is it about making sure everything is compliant and fills every regulation, even if it doesn't make sense? Or is it about improving the process and things and product that we do, right? The ultimate one is terrain, right? So we have a lot of different types of terrain that we operate in daily, right? We have our logical terrain, which is, in the IT space, it can be anything that's, more soft or whether it's a data environment, network environment, whatever it may be, how we share those things. You have geographical locations, right? So most everybody, I assume, on this call operates in multiple geographical locations or has operations in multiple geographical locations where you connect and work with those other folks in different offices and organizations and units and so on. You have the legal environment, which shifts based on a lot of different elements. In our case, specifically in Germany, because we have host nation issues and we have, NATO application and all these other pieces, the legal environment often shifts and it's very muddled. And then that is obviously impacted by the political environment, which we're all kind of feeling now, right? Which way's up kind of thing. And then at the end of that is really the budget and how does budget affect this, right? And what I mean by budget is the resources itself. So time is a budget, right? How much does that time cost, both in delay and in productivity and in literal monetary cost, depending on how you're working at it, right? Somebody's getting paid to do something. Your overall monetary budget, which goes into your POM cycles, your POAMs, all these things that you actually have. And then where the most frequent budget gap actually happens is in quality, right? It's more about having a person in a chair, if you will, or a button chair, where it's more about having something accomplished at some time. But as long as you can say the checkbox is checked, how well it's done isn't always the most important thing. And I think that does a massive disservice to every person and every team involved, because eventually that quality erosion, it affects morale and then so on. And we can kind of go down that downward spiral at some point. So what I see is one of the answers, and I'm not the only person that sees this for obvious reasons, is you actually need a dual operating system. Right, so, or dual processor, if you kind of want to look at it that way, where you can take your customer-centric aspect and through agile frameworks, and depending on your vernacular and what your particular, operation may be, you may shift or modify different agile frameworks, which is fine, but as long as you're using one, it does that plug into that hierarchy, right? So using this example, if you take some of those hierarchy things, but they're, say, a business unit that does, let's say, soft forces, right? Soft forces tend to be very agile. They go out and do a handful of different things. They come back, but they're overall managed by some type of hierarchical structure. Now, but when they're on the ground, they're very customer-centric. They're out for a very specific target to deliver a very specific thing. and all those pieces that support them all do those same things. And they have to have that agility because the time constraints of the dynamic environment force that. Otherwise, there could be several bad days for many people involved. So that's one way you can kind of look how that applies. But if you didn't have the hierarchy element of that to be able to build those support functions for the soft forces, it would not function as well or as easily. But that's just one example I'd like to kind of tease out a little bit. So here's where we kind of look at some of the solution. Right, and it really does have to kind of start at the top, but it's a bottom-up, top-down approach at the same time to be fully effective. Right, so leading change in general, right, requires that one, the leadership has the bandwidth to develop the vision or campaign plan, if you will. Looking at what needs to actually change, helping groups get together to focus on the change. And if you look to the left, you see the little tag that says psychological safety, right? So that's I would say, kind of a unique element that doesn't necessarily get pushed within the DoD environment very much. But what psychological safety means is that, in general, whoever has a good idea can bring that good idea up front without fear of reprise or some type of counterbalance in there. A good example would be if you take your random E1, E2 out there that may be very, very knowledgeable about digging holes because they dig holes all day long, but they're told to dig a hole a separate way, which doesn't necessarily make the most sense because it's not effective. So what do they do if they mention this is how I would dig the hole because it's the most effective and it gives you the best result? If they get beat down, eventually they stop doing that, right? So in that psychological safety perspective, it's an open conversation to where everybody can learn of how to do it more effective and decentralizing those less long-lasting decisions, such as how to dig a hole, so that way leaders have the availability mentally to actually start looking at those long-range effects that are going to last for quite a while. And then helping the training side of that as well, right? Bringing Agile into the DoD or into multiple organizations is not an easy task. It does take quite a bit of training to do so. The second part, like I said, you'll see some nuances here very close to military processes, right, is leading by example, which we've all heard that many times, and being authentic about it. So what that really means for the leader is actually just being themselves and leading in their own way and letting others know that, right? The emotional intelligence to understand, how your team is working and how to best motivate them. Looking at the lifelong learning aspects, right? So everybody who does learn those pieces and then growing together. And so that's kind of the left side of the slide. On the main part, here's where it gets a little more tricky, right? Is prioritizing the overall processes and decisions, right? And what's most important to the stakeholders, as I mentioned in the previous scenario, for SOC forces, right? For the SOC forces, what's most important to them? Is it their safety? Is it, making sure that the target is taken care of, or whatever the mission focus is? What's the team that does that? Who does it best? What do they need to do those things? And prioritizing those to get it not only to them, for them, but at the right time. Looking at the evaluation piece of it. So this is very similar to like an AAR would be for those Army folks, right? So what was done, right? What did done look like? What did we consider completed or mission accomplished? What went wrong with it? What could have been done better? What went well? How do we improve for the next round? Those are all some of those really high level questions that should be asked, even at the fundamental level of any operation, and it should be asked by everybody involved. And then that goes into the improvement piece. So one of the hard things that I see for DoD organizations is accepting change, right? We do it all the time, but we don't necessarily accept it depending on where we're at. So I think when we can get past that mental hurdle of, okay, change is going to happen regardless. We all live in dynamic environments in our mission spaces. So if we just accept that it will happen, rather than trying to stick to a hard, rigid plan because at one point that was there, not that plans are bad, you have to have them, but you have to have enough operational leeway to adjust the plan, if you will, right? The second part of that, as I mentioned with the E1 case, digging holes, is empowering to the lowest level, right? As a, say, a senior officer, general, colonel, whoever that may be, do you really need to make the decision of where and when to dig a hole? Probably not. However, allowing that lower enlisted or lower echelon person to say, yep, we need to dig holes there, not only empowers them, but it makes them develop that element that says, okay, this is what I do really well, and it's recognized, right? It seems simple, but it really is highly important. And then learning at all levels, right? So from bottom up, top down kind of perspective, learning those things. Now, if you notice, and I can send it out via the slides themselves, or if you look at the recording, either way, there's a YouTube link in the bottom of the page, which is David Marquette. And he really goes into his Navy experiences as submarine commander and does it through a fun cartoon of explaining how empowering at the lowest level really does affect the overall mission space and allow the leaders to do that, just lead. They don't have to think about every single detail, right? So very much the if you treat everybody as a grown-up, they act like grown-ups, but if you treat them like a child, that's what you get. And I'll move on to the next topic. So here's the hard truth with Agile. And some of you can't read it, so because you're on phone, so I'll read some of it. Right. So the organizational culture is one of the largest obstacles, as I've kind of been teasing out, to the outcome of being in a lean agile environment. Your organization's leadership absolutely has to understand and embrace all the agile principles for it to function, or you simply won't be able to move forward. And the reason why this is the case is if you don't believe that you can trust your people, then you're going to pull that back from them and the process dies. If you start taking the interaction away from individuals to present ideas, to kind of have that conversation and say, nope, we're going to have a tool that does all that for you. You just push the green button and have a nice day, right? The process dies. If you focus on comprehensive documentation over absolutely everything else, right? And this is one of my personal pet peeves, simply because I do a lot of security stuff. So having a working solution over a comprehensive documentation in the slide is one of the big ones to me, right? So if you have phenomenal documentation, but the solution doesn't work, it really doesn't do you much good, right? Great that you have it all documented, nobody can use it, so it dies, and somebody goes out and finds a workaround for it, which we have all faced those situations. So if you develop the working solution, and it's not that the documentation is not important, it's an absolute must, but having it work first is more important than having it fully documented to the nth degree, using RMF, and I'll get to that example later in the presentation. That's one of those things. Great that it's all there, but if it doesn't work and it doesn't provide the capability, at that point it's rather useless, right? The second part, and if you can see the slides, the keywords on the right, it's not that they're less important than the ones on the left. It's just that the ones on the left should be the focus, right? So collaboration versus negotiation, right? Working together and collaborating towards an element is obviously going to help you both develop a more succinct negotiation process. It's also going to help you reach towards that common goal much faster and much more effectively, right? Versus a negotiation where you're in a persistent trade-off or a quid pro quo type element of either giving up one thing to have another and so on. Second part of that that allows you to really kind of help build is responding to change, which, as I mentioned, we live in a highly dynamic environment, versus just following a plan. If the plan is so rigid that you can't change because the environments that we mentioned or the terrain had changed, whether it's logical, geographical, political, legal. If those shifts happen and your plane doesn't incorporate that capability to change, then you're at a stop point, right? For those that are on the phone, there's a really nice picture of Dirty Harry, right? And this is kind of the way Agile works. If you try implementing it without the all stakeholder buy-in, right, you're really just kind of playing with luck, if you will, right? So it has the, do you feel lucky punk kind of thing. So now that we've kind of encapsulated the high-level Agile mechanisms to kind of help us get there, right? I really want to focus on what I call the engined application, which is developing a value stream product. And when I say product, what I actually mean is anything, whether it's a document, a physical device, or a capability package to support some type of operation, looking at it as a product versus a project allows you to deliver it much easier and simpler because you can define what it is in a succinct manner versus we're trying to get there at some point in time, right? If you have a product, you can say, I'm going to deliver, I'll use a one off the top of my head. I'm going to deliver the car at 2:00, right? The car is the product. The timeline is 2:00. So you have a finite point. Or if you just say, I'm going to deliver a car, there's no element there. There's no type of what it is or who, and it just keeps it very ambiguous, which makes it difficult. It draws out over a long period of time, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all. For the motorheads, you'll notice it's a 448 in the back. All right, so the goal. So this slide, what I really want to look at is kind of how to encapsulate the organizational aspects. And I'm going to read it, but I want you to think of it as, so at the top level, there is a roof, there's 4 pillars, and then the foundation. I'm going to start at the bottom because you have to be able to start with the foundation level and then move up. Right, so at the foundation of Lean Agile leadership, it's really about applying lean thinking based on decision making, having those daily activities, the interactions, some of those other things that we talked about, and really providing that empowerment, right? So there's going into 4 pillars, right? There's the ones that I'd like to focus on are respect for people and culture, flow, which we'll get into the productization, innovation, and relentless improvement. And then, if you will, the roof is the overall goal or the value in this aspect, right? So one of those pillars, respect for people and culture, is creating a generative culture. And what that means is people are more about accomplishments versus avoiding risk, right? And to do that, you have to understand that people do all the work, right? That you may have phenomenal technology, however, people still have to support that technology to make it work correctly. We haven't quite hit that, singularity aspect yet, right? You have to understand that your customer is whoever consumes your work. And this is what I was mentioning regarding product, right? Whether it's a document, a con-op, for instance, or whether it's a physical product or an installation of a device or software or one of those things. Whoever consumes that product that you're using, that is your customer. And you have to really ingrain that into everybody's mind for that product to really be working, right? You're not doing them favors, you're delivering their product to them, right? And that helps you build those long-term partnerships because they trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. And then that also helps build the change, the culture that you have in the overall organization, because everybody becomes that elite, team, and then that elite group organization and all the rest of that, and it builds that whole process to where everybody is about accomplishment versus avoiding risk, right? The risk becomes less prominent in their mind, if you will. So the next pillar is flow, right? And this is one of those really more agile manufacturing type terms, but it still applies, right? So what it really entails is optimizing sustainable value delivery. So whatever your product is, finding a way to deliver it at a steady rate or faster, dependably, right? With high quality, understanding that there are some variabilities and having those elements in there or processes to adjust for those variabilities, right? And it really is the thought process of changing from projects to products. And once you can move away from the long-term project management aspect to we're delivering a product in intervals, then it becomes much easier to encapsulate that and have a steady cadence. The next pillar would be innovation. So one is having people that are both free and willing to think on their own, the time and space to actually think of new ideas or ways to improve. Go actually see something, right? We've all been in those cases where we've had long, in-depth conversations about whatever something is, only to go, months later and actually look at it and go, oh, right, it's that. The seven blind men and an elephant is a good analogy, right? Each of them believed it was something else, a tree, a wall, so on and so forth. But it was actually just an elephant because they couldn't actually go and see what it truly is, right? The second part of the innovation pillar that is really kind of hard for a lot of DoD agencies is experimentation and feedback, because it accepts the fact that you will, on some things, fail more frequently than not, but that loop back for improvement has to be quick and fast, so that way you can spin through. And then being able to pivot without mercy or guilt, which is something that DoD does very, very well, is being that change point and then moving on versus thinking about, okay, what could have happened or what should have happened, and just moving forward. So in the relentless improvement pillar is the constant sense of how do we do better, optimize the whole thing, effective problem solving, look at key milestones, and then base improvements on facts versus feelings. Right, that one's pretty simple. But the overall, encapsulation of it, if you will, is the goal of the value, which is truly developing the shortest sustainable lead time, the best quality for everybody involved, including the customer, while maintaining a high morale, safety, customer enjoyment or customer satisfaction perspective. In some cases, that may sound a little utopian. However, it is quite possible once it gets going. It's not pleasant at first, but once you get moving, it is. So this is the test I promised. And it's pretty simple, and it applies to you and your organization, right? So on a scale of 1 to 5, just kind of rate yourself in your organization and how your organization accomplishes things, right, for value delivery, right? How frequently and with what type of quality do you deliver a product to somebody, right? To whoever that customer may be. The respect for people and culture aspect that we just discussed, right? Same kind of thing, rating 1 to 5. Flow, which we just discussed, same, 1 to 5. Innovation, relentless improvement. And the add-in to this one that we talked about is that foundation on a leadership. How well does your leadership, meaning you specifically, because unless you're the absolute, epiphany of I do nothing, you lead at some point on some topic at least, along with your organizational leadership, is the way that I would look at that particular question. So I'll kind of leave that there so you have a moment to think about it. And then what I'd like to do at the end of the presentation, if anybody would like to kind of share and discuss those views of how they see things currently versus post-presentation, or how they may think of, improving their score, if you will. So to the point of organizing around value. Most enterprises are organized around functional expertise for efficiency, especially in hierarchy type organizations, right? Versus organizing around the value of a product delivery. That's where you have, for example, you have all of your IT people in one room, and all of your planners in another room, and all of your, strategy people in another room. The joint staff structure is very much that way, and then tiered underneath even more so, right? So the digital mission space that we currently live in requires speed in responding to the needs of customers and end users with new solutions, usually faster than what we can actually do, simply because the dynamic environment that the DoD exists in, along with many other elements that kind of influence the DoD. So it's incredibly difficult to keep up. But if we maintain those same hierarchical views, it makes it even more so, which is why a lot of elements get dropped, right? So that goes into the coordination amongst functional areas with, incumbent dependencies, handoffs, waste, delays. It's inefficient for warfighter environments because of those aspects. So operational agility demands that we as an enterprise organize around the value to deliver the products more quickly. So that way we can help that. And when mission changes rapidly and dynamically, the agency or organization must quickly and seamlessly reorganize around the new value flow. A fair example, if you will, many of us have been in the situation where a mission is shifted from, say, deploying to one geographical location to do it. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to talk without getting into details because we're on an open net. To where we're deploying to a particular geographical location that shifts because of some form of legal agreement or some type of political influence. So we move to a different geographical location, right? So the new value isn't that it changed. The new value is the new geographical location has a deployment schedule that we have to meet. And that's what we refunction at. So when it's as simple as saying a geographical move, the DoD does quite well. Military does quite well at that. But whenever it comes into, say, enterprise software, because of the other aspects that it may deal with, not quite as well as what it probably could do if we were able to productize things. Right, so this is a fair example of looking at Agile Teams. So the top part of it, right, from team 1 to team N, cross-functional teams and structuring that. So you have each team has all the skills they need to both build, define, deliver, and sustain that value stream. And then rolling that up into teams of, cross-functional, cross-component, operational and technology teams of Agile teams organized around those enterprise value streams, right? So kind of tiering this up, and this is where that hierarchical dual operating structure kind of functions, right? So at the small base customer centric, you have a team or maybe one or two teams that do a specific thing that have different cross-functional elements, such as, someone who does the planning, someone who does the actual development or implementation of something, someone else does the security and compliance and all these other pieces. And then whenever you roll that up to say, we're going to do large scale systems, or we're going to do large area deployments, that's where you have your larger team of teams that do all those pieces and coordinate that from that level, which isn't nothing new, but often it kind of has a lot of delays, which goes into this. And this is probably one of the more entertaining slides, I'd say, at least for my point, right? And it really does address, does value stream mapping increase capability, right? So the way that I would look at this is you have a couple different core values that are accomplished, right? In the left box, we start with the requirement. To develop that requirement, it takes a person or a team 2 hours for requirements developed. And then they email that to the approver, which takes about a week for whatever reason to email it to the approver to get to the next step. And then the next segment of value is the actual approver approving it, which takes an hour, right? They read the requirement, they filled it out, finished what they needed to do, and they email it to the technical lead, which takes another week of waiting for that email to either be received, sent, or integrated. And then the technical lead takes the piece of software or device or whatever is being applied. They go through their technical assessments. That takes 3 hours. They mail it off to the authorizing official in an ATO package, which takes an additional week. Then the authorizer looks at it, says, yep, it checks out. Everything looks good. 1 hour later, approves it, sends it off. And then between, the authorizer and the deployment, operationally, it takes about 2 weeks, but it only takes about an hour to actually install it, right? So your value stream in there, where value is actually added to the process, equates to about 8 hours, right? Or 1 business day. The delay to actually get from requirement to deployment is 5 weeks, because it took a week between each value element. And this is all hypothetical, but everybody gets the point, right? It takes about 5 weeks. So for the capability to exist, it took 1 day worth of work and 5 weeks worth of delay, which basically killed the capability, because in this scenario, we'll say, it needed to be delivered within 4 weeks. However, because of either the process or the plan, but more importantly, the inefficiencies and the delays are what created that. So this is one of those elements where having an automated stream would help push that much quicker. But what I'd like you to take away from the slide is simply that understanding where those wait periods are and what that delay period is helps with the overall capacity planning, cadence, and it also allows you areas to say, okay, does it really take a week for this piece to happen? If we have that cross-functional team or that cross-enterprise team of teams perspective, does that allow us to shorten those time periods, right? For instance, we'll say in this room, if you had someone who collected requirements, approved requirements, and assessed the requirements all in the same room where they could discuss exactly what it is and build an incremental level, how quickly could you crash that schedule, right? To be able to send the ATO package to the authorizer. Even if that cut each one of those 1 week periods that I put in there down to 2 days, that took almost 3 weeks off the project or off of the product delivery, in this case, the capability overall. Right, so the next slide here is really more about battle rhythm. And it can be seen in a couple different ways. Battle rhythm, obviously the military term for it, but what it is cadence and synchronization, right? How we do things, if you will, right? So what cadence does is it converts unpredictable events into predictable occurrences at a lowers cost. And that's usually a cost in time and a cost in quality, not necessarily a monetary cost, right? So if you, for instance, if you're going out on an operation and certain things are possible, say a piece of equipment fails. If you already know that you have that backup, right, it's unpredictable that the equipment will fail. But if you have a risk mitigation that says, I have a spare, okay, great. It fails, I have a quick replacement, I can put it in, right? That's an easy example, right? It allows waiting times for new work to be more predictable, right? So as the job or work in progress is better predictive of how far that capacity can go and how long it will take. That allows you to get the next thing out of the backlog or out of the work to be done bin, if you will, up in the front and accomplish the next task and really build that accomplishment chain, if you will. Right? Cadence also supports regular planning and cross-functional coordination. Right? So if you're saying every 2 weeks we're going to have a planning meeting about this product, just to double check, and then you have a daily. You have that piece. This is where we're at. So you have that constant rhythm of every day we discuss this product, where we're at, what the prediction is of when it's going to be delivered. The other part of that is it allows you to limit batch size or how big the job is, right? It's very difficult, and I'll use RMF in this example. It's very difficult to deliver an entire RMF package and understand how much is going to be in there, right? But it's far easier to say, I'm going to deliver, the ports and protocol aspects of the RMF package by this date, and just break that up into each of those pieces, right? Whether it's the, report, risk assessment report, or an SSP, or the SCTM, or whatever those little pieces are. If you can chunk that into the smallest size possible, that allows you to increase the overall capacity and throughput of the operation to deliver the product. It also allows you to develop schedule integration points, which feeds into synchronization. But so a good way to look at that is if you know you're going to have your risk assessment report and it has to be signed off by another organization for processes that it is done, then you can coordinate that when it's going to be done, how it's going to be done, and how it fits right back into the next step, right? And to deliver that value chain much faster, because they know you're going to have it accomplished by 4 days and this cycles within a 2-week period, or whatever that that period is. 2 weeks to 3 weeks tends to be about the best cycle rate, at least for most of the organizations I've worked with, right? But cadence absolutely requires scope and or capacity margin, right? There has to be a little bit of fudge room, a day or two, an hour or two, however that may be. So the next segment of this slide, we're going to discuss synchronization real quick, which causes multiple. If you look at synchronization at a high level, synchronization is causing multiple events to happen simultaneously. So in the aspect of, the RMF package, having the assessment piece, the implementation piece, security control selections, security control testing, all those pieces going simultaneously allows you to narrow that gap of delivery much sooner. It helps facilitate cross-functional trade-offs where you may need a operational perspective for a particular thing, and you need a technical perspective for a particular product. It allows you to start building routine delivery dependencies with management, right? So it takes 4 days to finish this particular item within that deployment cycle. Now we know every 4 days this can be done, right? It helps build that overall, I guess you say, capacity picture. And that helps feed the effective planning cycles. So here's one of the hard ones for a lot of organizations, and this is the decision making. Right, so defining decision making is a logic basic process that empowers others to actually make decisions, right? So in short, that what that means is if others know why a decision is being made and the purpose behind the decision, even if it's not at the same level, they know if the goal is this, all my decisions are based on achieving that goal, right? And the way that you can look at that is through centralized and decentralized decision making. So in centralized decision making, those are the things that are going to be infrequent, right? They don't happen very often. They're usually not super urgent that it has to happen, but they're large decisions. They're long lasting, right? These are like major policy decisions, national partner agreements, things like that, that once they're made, they don't change very frequently. Campaign plans, that type of stuff, right? They have significant economies of scale, right? So it impacts a large group. For instance, we use news lately. The president stating that a lot of forces are going to move to Poland. That's a massive impact, right? It's a significant economies of scale for multiple things. And it's not something that happens very frequently, right? We don't just randomly move an entire military organization, right? Those are centralized decisions that have to be made by those senior leaders. Now, on the opposite side of that is decentralizing everything else, right? So these are frequent, routine, everyday type decisions, right? Do I need to dig a hole? How deep should the hole be? How fast should I dig the hole? Do I need to deploy a antivirus? Which antivirus should I deploy? That doesn't necessarily need to be boiled up to a senior leader to determine, okay, we're going to use this particular software on this particular device. But it should be pushed down to the lowest level possible to say, okay, this is what should happen here because I have the most hands-on local required information to make sure that that happens correctly, right? That's the way the knowledge management or knowledge working piece of it goes. There's a lot of examples you can use for that, but the key point really is making sure that the decentralized decisions are the ones that aren't the high-level things that have to happen that are going to be slow and hard to change, but the fast decisions to deliver the product in the best way possible is kind of the encapsulation there. So in this slide, looking at the incremental versus waterfall delivery perspective, right? So incremental allows you a much higher feedback. You're delivering a product, a small batch product, and then getting that feedback from your customer. Is this what you want? Maybe not. No. Is this what you want? Yes. And kind of going through that and building step by step. So at the end of it, you have something that has everything the customer wants, that's deployed, that's approved, that fits all those things. And some of those features may be long reaching and coming back at another day, because it's simply not technically possible. Okay, so I think I was running a little long-winded. I did see the note. But the point of this slide is really understanding that if you have short wins with quick feedback, it allows you to develop and deploy much quicker and get the capability on the ground without having as much high risk as hoping that everything works and then deploying and finding out there's many, many issues. So looking at how that applies from a risk perspective, acronym called roaming, which is resolving the risk, owning the risk, accepting the risk, and mitigating the risk. A large aspect of value stream mapping. And I'll just kind of go through it. So the big piece is understanding the scope, the practices, or mapping your practices, and then understanding how to improve those. So I'm going to throw up a quick compliance example. There's only about 3 more slides. Right, so this is kind of how compliance fits in the current DoD environment. Right, we have a tailored capability. It has a lot of different inputs, different practices, templates, RMF, so on and so forth. And then it goes into the RMF compliance bin, and then it goes into the black hole process, right? Where at some point in time it's approved or not approved, and it has to resubmit and get new paperwork, or we end up with a partial capability. The advantage of using Agile framework perspective is allows you to create that synchronized and cadence element to chunk those into small pieces and actually build that out. Right. I can go more in depth, but we are running slightly short on time. So in summary, Agile engineering is not easy. It requires everybody's buy-in from top to bottom and bottom to top. You have to focus on your customer. In this presentation, I was trying to really focus on the warfighter. right? Build around their needs, organize around value, deliver capability incrementally, and making your life easier by building cadence, synchronizing, empowering with decentralized decisions, and prioritizing centralized decisions. So I guess at the end of the day, it's really about, is this still what you think Agile is? And I'm done. So I think I can stop the share. Let's scale back up.
This is Richard via phone. I just was wondering if I can get a copy of those slides sent to my registration email.
I can PDF it and share it if you like.
That would be awesome.
So I think I'm gonna stop the recording. But I just did have a quick comment. I think you're being very generous, Ricky, with the 5-week delay, because when you were talking about the value stream and delay, because I've been working on a project right now that I have like a 4-month delay. So,
well, so that's like I said, I don't want to point out lots of things I've done on those projects. That's why I say if we can rearrange things towards a product base, it makes it much easier, because then it allows people to focus on, we're delivering this at this point. So if you take what you're currently working on, how well could that be chunked out to say, okay, at point in time A, we're going to deliver this much of the final feature or the final product, right? And then that's done. And then you can move on to the next piece, right? So that way somebody has something. It's been my experience that the long wait periods and delays are what force a lot of the thrashing in organizational decisions, because they don't have something. They figure, I'll just go get something else, you're taking too long.